My parents stopped talking to me after I married my partner, but now they want to get back in touch with me because I'm pregnant. I, 28F, have always had a hard time getting along with my parents, especially when it comes to what they want for my future. I grew up in a wealthy area and was always compared to my older sister Amber, 30F. She did amazing in everything she did, got straight A's in school, and went on to become a successful lawyer at a well-known firm in New York. I, on the other hand, was a more free-spirited person. Art and writing were more interesting to me than science and math, which my parents thought were very important. Our family has a lot of money. My dad, Richard, is 60 years old and pretty wealthy, and my mom, Rose, is 58 years old and comes from a similarly wealthy family. She spends most of her time volunteering for different causes. Though I should be honest, I'm more interested in the social aspect than in actually giving. Their main goal has always been to protect our social standing and ties. From the moment I was born, my parents made plans for my whole life. It was planned that I would go to an Ivy League school, ideally Harvard like my dad did, study business or law, marry someone from a good family meaning they were wealthy, and had a lot of connections, and then run the family business with Amber. That's not what I had planned for my life, though. The arts have always interested me more. I liked going to the city's museums, painting, and writing poems. My parents thought these were cute hobbies but not things that could be used as a job. They pushed me into things outside of school that they thought would be better for me, like summer internships at my dad's company and tennis lessons. I did everything they asked of me to keep the peace, but I never really felt like I fit into the world they had planned for me. My folks were upset that I didn't get into Harvard when I got into Brown University, but they thought it was fine. Their hope was that putting me in touch with the right people would finally set me on the path they had always had for me. They didn't know it would lead me to the person who would change my life forever. In my second year of college, I met Chad, 29M. In the college coffee shop, we almost ran into each other. I was in a hurry to get to class and didn't look where I was going. He, on the other hand, was leaving with a tray of coffee for his study group. Due to the accident, hot coffee flew all over the place and stained both of our clothes. Chad didn't get angry. Instead, he just laughed and said, "Well, I guess this is one way to break the ice." We skipped our classes and talked for hours instead. Chad was everything my parents would not like, which made me want him even more. He was born into a poor family in a small Ohio town. His mother worked as a cook, and his father worked in a factory. Chad was getting a full grant to go to Brown and working part-time to pay for it. He wanted to be a teacher because he loved learning and wanted to make a change in kids' lives. I thought Chad was special from the moment we met. Besides being nice and funny, he worked very hard. He had a special way of making me feel like he saw and understood me. I could be myself around Chad, not the perfect daughter my parents wanted me to be, but the real me, with all my quirks and flaws. It was the first time in my life that I went on a date. I really felt happy. Chad pushed me to follow my dreams and encouraged my imagination in ways that my family never did. When I told him I wanted to be a graphic artist, he didn't laugh it off or put it like my parents do. Instead, he helped me look into schools and places to do internships. Of course, my parents hated him from the first time they met him. During Parents' Weekend of our junior year, it took place. They'd been put off meeting because I knew it wouldn't go well, but I couldn't wait any longer. The meeting was a mess from the start. My family couldn't see past Chad's past. To them, he was just a poor kid trying to move up in society by going out with me. They often said mean things about his clothes, which weren't expensive labels, his weak Midwest accent, and the job he chose. My mom asked him over and over if he was sure he wanted to be a teacher when there were so many other ideas out there. There are good jobs available. My dad barely noticed Chad was there. He was only talking to me and telling me he didn't like it. It didn't matter to them that Chad was nicer to me than the trust fund boys they tried to set me up with. They were convinced that all he wanted was our money and status. When I tried to support Chad by saying how smart he was and how hard he worked, my dad said, "Oh honey, don't be naive, boys like that always have a case." Even though my folks didn't like it, Chad and I kept dating while we were in college. We kept each other going while we studied late at night, enjoyed our successes together, and talked about our plans for the future. I felt free to be myself around Chad and choose my own road instead of the one my parents had planned for me. After college, Chad asked her to marry him. My parents were looking forward to a big fancy party, but it wasn't that. We were camping for the weekend, which my parents would never understand, and it was a beautiful night to sit by the campfire and look at the stars. "Will you marry me?" Chad asked me. "I know I can't give you the fancy life you grew up with, but I promise to love and support you in everything you do." I agreed without any doubt. As soon as I told my parents we got back from our trip, chaos broke out. My mom broke down in tears and told me I was wasting my life. Is my dad's. He got very angry and said I was making the worst choice of my life. His face turned a scary shade of red. They said I was stupid and couldn't see straight, My mom told me to think about your future. She meant, how will you keep living the way you do now? What about your kids? You want them to have the best of everything, right? I tried to tell him that Chad and I had talked about our plans for the future, and that we were ready for any problems that might come up. They wouldn't listen, though. For them, marrying Chad meant deciding to live a poor and unhappy life. They gave me an option when I refused to back out of the engagement. I either end things with Chad or they stop talking to me. There won't be any more grants, loans, trust funds, or inheritances. My dad told me, if you really want to live like a commoner, you can do it without our money. I was shocked by their response. I knew they wouldn't be happy, but I didn't think they would go this far. That's when I realized that their love and support had always been conditional. As long as I did what they wanted and fit into their narrow view of success, I was their daughter. But as soon as I chose my own path, they were ready to throw me out. I chose Chad. We got married in a small ceremony with only a few close friends. It wasn't the fancy society wedding my parents had always imagined for me, but it was perfect in its sincerity and simplicity. Amber didn't even show up, she told our parents. I got a cold, formal letter from my parents' lawyer the day after my wedding. It told me that I had been taken out of their will, and that Amber was now the only heir to their wealth. It also said that I was no longer welcome in the family home, and that any future attempts to contact my parents would be dealt with legally. It hurt more than I could have imagined. It wasn't because of the money. Chad and I were both working and doing fine, but because my family had put their old beliefs and social status ahead of my happiness. The parents who had raised me and who I thought loved me no matter what had been thrown out the window. They turned me away because I wasn't perfect in their eyes, and we didn't talk to each other for 3 years. I tried to get back in touch a few times, sending letters and leaving voicemails on holidays and birthdays, but they never answered. Eventually, I gave up. During that time, Chad and I built a life together. He worked hard as an English teacher at a high school, and I worked hard as a graphic designer for a small advertising agency. We bought a small house in a nice neighborhood and adopted a rescue dog named Max. We weren't rich, and we had to watch our money carefully to make ends meet. But we had love. I found out I was pregnant 3 years after my wedding. Chad and I were thrilled. We hadn't been trying, but we both wanted kids and were looking forward to this new part of our lives. We decided to wait until after the first trimester to tell people, just to be safe. A week after we told our friends, I got a text message from Amber. It was the first time I'd heard from her in 3 years. It was short and to the point. Mom and Dad heard about the baby. They want to talk. Call them. I was shocked. How did they even find out? I hadn't told anyone in my family, and as far as I knew, after talking about it with Chad, I decided to call them. Maybe the thought of becoming grandparents had softened their hearts. When I called, my mother answered on the second ring. The conversation was awkward. My mother did most of the talking, and I could hear my father breathing heavily and occasionally grunting in agreement. She congratulated me on my pregnancy and then, for no reason, started talking about how they wanted to make amends and be a part of their grandchild's life. There was no apology for how they had treated me or recognition of the pain they had caused. It was as if the last 3 years of silence had never happened. But then she started talking about sending us some gifts for the baby. Before I could say anything, she kept talking about a list of. I was shocked when she told me they wanted to buy a new family car, a top-of-the-line stroller, a custom-made crib, designer baby clothes, and more. It didn't feel like a peace offering. It felt more like they were trying to buy their way back into my life and my child's life. When I tried to politely say no, saying Chad and I had already started getting ready for the baby, my mother got angry. "Don't be silly," she yelled. "You can't possibly provide for this child the way we can. We're just trying to help. Don't let your pride get in the way of." At the end of the call, my mom said that they were going to send the gifts anyway, and that they were looking forward to being involved in their grandchild's life. She never asked me how I was feeling, how my pregnancy was going, or even how Chad was doing. It was all about the gifts and their expectations. When I told Chad about the call, he was furious. He thought that my parents were trying to put us down and show that they could give our child things that we couldn't. "They're trying to buy their way into our lives," he said, pacing around our small living room. "Once we accept these gifts, they'll be in our lives." Even though I knew Chad was right, I still had a small part of hope that maybe this was just my parents' awkward attempt to get back together. Maybe if we gave them a chance, they would come around and accept Chad and our life together. "Maybe they've changed," I said, even though I didn't really believe it. "Maybe becoming grandparents has made them realize what's truly important." Chad looked at me and asked, "Do you really believe that? Or are you just hoping it's true because you miss them?" His words hit home. I did miss my family, despite everything. I missed family dinners, holiday celebrations, and inside jokes that only we knew. But I also couldn't forget the bad times, the constant pressure, the disapproval, and the way they had pushed me aside when I was younger. Chad says he'll support whatever choice I make, but I can tell he doesn't want to accept anything from my parents. He's afraid that they'll try to control our lives and the upbringing of our child. We've been doing fine on our own, he tells me. We don't need their money or approval. Amber has been calling me nonstop, switching between telling me I'm holding a grudge and being excited about being an aunt. She doesn't seem to understand why I'm hesitating to accept our parents' offer. They're trying to make things right, she says. Why can't you just let go of the past? But it's not that simple. The past has shaped who I am and the life I've chosen. Reddit, what should I do? I really need some good advice on what to do. First, I want to thank everyone for their help and advice. After much thought with Chad, we decided to turn down my parents' offer of gifts. It wasn't easy, but we felt it was the right choice for our family. I called my mother and told her that we appreciated the gesture, but we weren't comfortable accepting such expensive gifts. I tried to keep the conversation civil and suggested that if they wanted to be a part of our child's life, we could start with smaller steps, like having dinner together to talk things over. My mother didn't like it. She accused me of being ungrateful and she told me I was being stubborn by denying my child chances out of spite. You're making a huge mistake, she said. It will make you sad if your child grows up without the things we can do for them. I stood my ground, though. I made it clear that Chad and I could take care of our child and that all we needed from them was a link, not money. When we were done talking, my mom hung up the phone. That made me think it was over, but I was wrong. A few days later, a truck pulled up to our house with the stroller, cot, baby clothes, and even the keys to a brand new car parked on our street. This was everything my mom had promised. Our grandchild got a note. We won't let your pride keep them from getting the best. Chad and I were shocked. We did not know what to do with all of this. It felt like an attack on our set limits. We chose to keep everything in the garage until we knew what to do. I wasn't sure if I should send everything back right away when Chad wanted to. The situation got worse when Amber came over to our house the next day. And the gifts made her so happy that it seemed like nothing had ever gone wrong between us. Isn't it great? She gushed. Mom and Dad are thrilled to have grandchildren. They wish to help in any way possible. I tried to tell her our point of view, but she didn't seem to get it. Why are you being so hard to deal with? She asked. Most people would be thrilled to receive such wonderful presents. It seems like you think Mom and Dad are bad guys. The conversation turned into a fight very quickly. Amber told me I was selfish and hanging on to old grudges. She claimed that they were trying to say sorry. Why don't you just let them love you and move on? I lost it at that point. Love? I said, is that avoiding me for 3 years and then trying to get back into my life by buying it? Honey, that's not love. Now you have power. Amber stomped off angry and told me I was going to make a terrible mistake. This time you're going to push them away for good, she warned. And it will be your fault when your child grows up without grandparents. To make things even more difficult, our extended family has heard about it. I've been getting calls and texts from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all of whom want me to make peace with my parents. They're your parents, my Aunt Sharon said during one particularly frustrating call. I tried to explain that after years of not talking to them, this felt less like a real attempt at reconciliation and more like an attempt to buy their way back into our lives. But it's hard for people who haven't been through it to understand. Chad stood by my side, supporting my choices while also giving me a different point of view when I needed it. We don't need their money, he reminds me. We're doing fine on our own. Our child will have everything they need, love, support, and 2 parents who adore them. I'm now 16 weeks pregnant, and I don't feel like enjoying this special time. The gifts are still in our garage, a reminder of the choice we have to make. Chad wants to donate everything to a local women's shelter, but I don't want to. It feels like we're closing the door on any chance of getting back together when we hesitate. Amber keeps sending me pictures of baby clothes and nursery ideas while acting like nothing is wrong. My parents haven't called or texted me since the gifts arrived, but I know they're waiting for a response. Every day, new calls and messages from family members add to the pressure. As my pregnancy goes on, I know we need to make a decision soon. We can't leave those gifts in the garage forever, and we need to start getting ready for the baby's arrival. But every time I think I've made up my mind, I change my mind. Chad and I have talked about seeing a family counselor to help us deal with this. Maybe someone from outside our relationship. We're taking things one day at a time for now. I'm trying to focus on the good things about my pregnancy and our life together, but the family drama is always there in the background. I just hope that whatever choice we make is the best one for our child. Final update: it's been 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share how things turned out for us. A lot has changed, and I've made some hard but necessary choices. After weeks of not knowing what to do, Chad and I decided to see a family counselor. We had several sessions, both together and separately, to talk about our problems. The counselor helped us figure out our priorities and values and how to set healthy boundaries. At the same time, my family put more pressure on us. My parents started showing up at our house without warning, knocking on the door for hours and saying they just wanted to talk. It was very stressful, especially as my pregnancy went on and I was dealing with the physical pain that came with it. Amber kept sending me messages every day about how I was tearing the family apart and threatened to cut me out of her life if I didn't make peace with our parents, even though we hadn't talked in years. When I was 32 weeks pregnant, my parents showed up at work and caused a scene in the lobby. They wanted to see me and said they had a right to be involved in their grandchild's life. My coworkers were uncomfortable, and my boss had to tell them to leave or he'd call the police. That made me realize that my parents hadn't changed at all. They were still trying to control my life, ignoring my boundaries and wishes. It wasn't about love or reconciliation, it was about getting their way, no matter what. After talking about it with Chad and our counselor, we made the hard decision to stop communicating with my parents and Amber. We sent a formal cease and desist letter through a lawyer, saying that any further attempts to contact us would be seen as harassment. We gave all the baby gifts to a local women's shelter, as Chad had suggested months before. It was hard to let them go, but it felt like the best thing to do. The day after we sent the letter, I blocked my parents and Amber on all platforms. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the freeingst. The constant stress and anxiety I'd been feeling started to go away almost right away. Our daughter Susan was born 2 months ago. The birth was complicated, and there were times when I wished my mother had been there. But Chad was great, and we got through it together. These first few weeks of being parents have been hard, but incredibly rewarding. Susan is perfect, and seeing Chad with her makes me fall in love with him all over again. We may not have all the nice things my parents wanted to give us, but we have love, and that's more than enough. Looking at Susan makes me even more sure than ever that we made the right choice. I want her to grow up in a home where love and respect are constant. People will judge her and try to control her, but she is valuable because of who she is as a person. She won't have the material things my parents could have given her, but she will have parents who love her no matter what and support her dreams. She'll learn that it's okay to set limits, stand up for herself, and choose her own path in life. This journey has been hard, but I don't regret our decision. We're moving forward, focusing on our little family and the bright future ahead of us. Thank you to everyone who has helped us along the way. Your advice and kind words have meant a lot. Here's to new beginnings and choosing happiness even when it's the harder path.